Have you ever witnessed a betrayal so raw, so heartbreaking, that it changed someone's life overnight? Picture a glittering penthouse in New York City, where a sharp-suited millionaire clinks champagne glasses with a sultry mistress. Across the room stands his pregnant wife, tears threatening to spill, as her husband publicly denies their unborn child. Everyone gasps, the orchestra's violins falter, and the entire world tilts in that single, crushing moment. But fate has a funny way of evening the scales. In a twist nobody saw coming, that devastated woman soon appears where no one expects, at the boardroom table, wielding unimaginable power. Malcolm Rutherford was the epitome of triumph. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with the confident stride of a natural-born leader, he personified the American dream. Born into modest circumstances in suburban Ohio, he clawed his way up the financial ladder with unrelenting ambition. By the time he turned 35, his investment firm, Rutherford and Pierce Holdings, boasted high-rise offices in New York, London, and Hong Kong. He lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, regularly traveled by private jet, and made cameo appearances at exclusive events alongside magnates like Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Whenever cameras were around, he'd flash a winning smile and graciously thank his late parents for teaching him the value of hard work. But what the tabloids often glossed over was the darker undercurrent of Malcolm's life. He had a knack for seeing people as stepping stones, a pattern that emerged even in his personal relationships. Ambition drove every decision he made, including his choice of wife, Sarah Talbot, a refined socialite from an old-money family in Boston. Their marriage had seemed a promising alliance of wealth and pedigree, recognized by glossy society magazines and admired by their shared circles. Sarah, with her sweet disposition and impeccable family background, was the perfect partner to cement Malcolm's place among the elite. However, Sarah was more than just a decorative spouse. She was philanthropic, volunteering countless hours with charitable organizations and quietly building connections to prominent donors. Her empathy and emotional intelligence added color to the polished facade of the Rutherford brand, making philanthropic causes more accessible and more profitable for Malcolm's firm. In the eyes of the public, they were the quintessential power couple. Yet behind the facade of prosperity, tensions simmered. In the past year, Sarah had noticed Malcolm's late nights at the office had nothing to do with paperwork. The phone calls he took outside their penthouse were suddenly more frequent and furtive. The gentle cologne that once lingered on his suits after a business meeting had been replaced by the scent of a brand of perfume Sarah didn't recognize, a sweet, exotic trace that didn't belong to her. One evening, as Sarah stood alone on the expansive balcony overlooking Central Park, she felt a pang of loneliness piercing through the glitter of her life. She had just found out she was pregnant, and the news was both thrilling and terrifying. She'd always wanted to share this moment with her husband, to see the joy in his eyes. But the Malcolm she knew, ambitious, restless, seemed more distant than ever. Sarah told herself that once he heard the news, everything would change for the better. They'd be drawn closer, forging a tighter bond through the shared excitement of expecting a child. Sarah had never doubted her husband's ambition or moral fiber before. She expected him to embrace fatherhood with the same determination he applied to everything else in life. She had no idea just how wrong she was. The cracks in Malcolm's marital facade deepened with the arrival of Elena Moretti, a striking raven-haired business consultant from Milan. Elena specialized in corporate restructuring and was rumored to have an uncanny ability to fix failing businesses, often on very favorable terms for herself. She commanded attention whenever she entered a room. Her sleek black dresses whispered of couture, Her posture exuded self-assuredness, and her fluent banter in 5 languages enchanted high society circles. Malcolm first met Elena at a lavish fundraiser hosted by the philanthropic arm of Rutherford and Pierce. The event took place at a private art gallery with internationally renowned journalist Anderson Cooper serving as the evening's moderator. Sarah was meant to be there, but she had fallen ill that afternoon, and her doctor advised rest. Malcolm, determined not to miss a prime networking opportunity, went alone. The moment he spotted Elena discussing art pieces with an investor from Germany, he was entranced. Elena was not just an observer, but a commanding figure who seemed to weave conversations like an artist with a paintbrush. It didn't take long for them to flirt. She recognized Malcolm from a Forbes cover, and he was eager to explain the intricacies of his firm's investment strategy, peppered with subtle bragging about his net worth. Elena was enthralled, or so it appeared. On the surface, she listened intently, her eyes flickering with admiration whenever Malcolm concluded a tale of financial conquest. Their affair began that very night. Under the art gallery's majestic skylight, they slipped into an unoccupied corridor amid half-shrouded sculptures, exchanging stolen whispers and phone numbers. Each step they took away from the main hall carried a sense of transgression that quickened their heartbeats. During the subsequent weeks, Elena employed her own brand of cunning. She peppered Malcolm with text messages, praising his business savvy, calling him unstoppable and visionary. Her presence was intoxicating. She was always impeccably dressed, always brimming with stories of corporate conquests from Europe to the Middle East. For a man like Malcolm, driven by ego and hungry for validation, it was like a drug he couldn't resist. He began lying to Sarah more frequently. Late-night board meetings, sudden investor lunches, emergency flights out of the city. Each rendezvous with Elena reignited Malcolm's appetite for excitement. She challenged him, teased him with glimpses of an even more extravagant lifestyle, and promised that together they could do wonders. He told himself it was merely a fling, something a powerful businessman might discreetly keep on the side. All the while, he denied the gravity of his deceit, convincing himself that Sarah would never find out, or if she did, she would turn a blind eye. What Malcolm failed to see was Elena's unrelenting ambition, which matched or even eclipsed his own. As they navigated clandestine hotel suites and expensive bars on Madison Avenue, Elena took mental notes, the strengths and vulnerabilities of Rutherford and Pierce, the key figures within Malcolm's network, and perhaps most crucially, the personal weaknesses that drove him. Meanwhile, Sarah sensed her husband drifting further away. She tried to share the news of her pregnancy, but each time she found an opportune moment, Malcolm claimed urgent business calls or seemed distracted by text messages from clients. She was becoming a ghost in her own home, overshadowed by an invisible presence that neither she nor Malcolm had fully acknowledged. Yet in her heart, Sarah believed that love, if once genuine, could be restored. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes betrayal cuts too deep. Several weeks passed, and Sarah finally decided she could not wait any longer to reveal her pregnancy to Malcolm. She arranged a private dinner at their penthouse, complete with flickering candlelight and a delicate bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite flowers. With trembling hands, she set the table for two, hoping the intimate setting would urge Malcolm to open up about whatever had been troubling him. When Malcolm arrived, he wore the exasperated look of a man with too many meetings in one day. He paused briefly at the threshold of the dining room, taking in the soft lights and the elegantly draped table. "This looks lovely," he said, half smiling, though his eyes lacked genuine warmth. Sarah felt her heart flutter with nerves. She guided him to his seat and began the conversation with small talk, the day's stock market movements, a philanthropic event, scheduled for the following weekend, and an update about her family in Boston. But Malcolm responded with only passing interest, checking his phone every few minutes. Finally, Sarah gathered her courage and spoke the words she had rehearsed for days. "Malcolm, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." She watched for the spark of happiness in his expression, but it never materialized. Instead, he stared at her, his jaw slack with disbelief. And beneath that disbelief, Sarah sensed a glimmer of irritation, almost as if her pregnancy was an inconvenience rather than a blessing. A tense silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. "That's surprising," he eventually said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes, I saw Dr. Levin this morning. I'm about 10 weeks along. I wanted to— We should talk about this," Malcolm interrupted, rubbing his temples as though warding off a headache. "But not tonight. I have to make a call." He abruptly stood and left the room before Sarah could utter another word. She stared at his empty chair, her heart crumbling under the weight of his indifference. This was not the reaction she had envisioned. She had imagined tears of joy, warm embraces, and talk about names or nursery colors. Instead, she was left alone, 2 plates of food untouched, and a swirl of dread in her stomach. In the days that followed, Malcolm evaded any discussion of the pregnancy. Sarah tried to corner him in the mornings before he rushed off to the office, but he claimed time constraints. She invited him to her next doctor's appointment. He declined, citing a critical meeting. She even suggested they go on a short vacation to reconnect, but he scoffed at the idea of leaving urgent business matters behind. At night, he often didn't come home at all. One evening, after calling his secretary and hearing he'd left hours earlier, Sarah realized that the business dinners were a sham. And a searing suspicion took hold. Her husband was seeing another woman. What Sarah didn't know was that the worst humiliation was yet to come, and it would shatter her world in a very public way. The moment Sarah's suspicions crystallized into certainty was at the Rutherford and Pierce annual gala, a highly publicized event held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The gala served as both a fundraiser for the firm's philanthropic arm and a celebration of the company's successes. Major clients, media representatives, and wealthy donors attended, all eager to network under the glow of priceless artifacts and the Met's soaring ceilings. Sarah had been debating whether to attend at all. She felt emotionally raw, and her pregnancy had left her with bouts of morning sickness. But her official role as co-host, plus her innate sense of duty, pushed her to put on a dazzling silver gown and a brave face. She told herself that Malcolm might behave better under the watchful eyes of New York's elite. Maybe, just maybe, they would find a moment of honest conversation. From the moment she arrived, however, it was evident Malcolm's attention was elsewhere. She spotted him across the marble foyer, deep in conversation with a stunning woman in a sleek black dress. The woman's hand casually brushed Malcolm's forearm, her lips curving into a knowing smile. It was Elena Moretti. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. For weeks she had seen the signs but had no proof of who the other woman might be. Now, the truth stood before her, clad in designer couture, laughing intimately with her husband in plain view. Determined not to create a scene, Sarah moved through the crowd, greeting guests, thanking donors, and maintaining the impeccable poise expected of a hostess. But each time her gaze drifted back to Malcolm, she found him with Eleanor. They were too close, too familiar. Other guests began to notice as well, their murmurs drifting like venomous snakes throughout the gallery. Midway through the evening, the master of ceremonies stepped onto a small stage near the Temple of Denda to introduce Malcolm. A hush fell over the room, and the spotlight shifted to him. Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped tightly, a swirl of dread settling in her stomach. She knew the highlight of the gala was Malcolm's speech, during which he typically lauded the company's philanthropic contributions and provided a visionary glimpse of future expansions. Tonight, though, the air crackled with tension. Malcolm cleared his throat and began his speech with polished aplomb. He praised the generosity of the donors' name-dropped conversations he'd had with Bill Gates about philanthropic pursuits, and even mentioned a preliminary discussion with Elon Musk on clean energy investments. The crowd applauded politely, charmed by his charismatic performance. Then, a curious shift happened. Elena slowly appeared behind him near the edges of the stage, as if to stake her silent claim. The spectacle was not lost on the audience. A few camera shutters clicked, capturing the moment. At that instant, an intrepid society reporter for the New York Daily, Helena Brooks, stepped forward. She held out a microphone, her expression sharp with curiosity. "Mr. Rutherford," she began, "rumors have been circulating about your personal life. Care to address them?" A ripple of shock passed through the audience. Malcolm's eyes flashed with annoyance. Sarah stood rooted to her spot, her mouth suddenly dry. "There is speculation," Helena continued, "that your wife, Sarah Rutherford, is expecting a child. Congratulations are in order unless the rumors are untrue." The silence was deafening. Sarah felt her breath catch. She prayed Malcolm would say something kind, or at least gracious. Instead, he glanced at Elena with a tight smile. Then he turned back to Helena and delivered a blow that splintered Sarah's world. "I have no idea what you're talking about. My wife isn't pregnant. And even if she were, it has nothing to do with me. These are baseless rumors." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several attendees turned to stare at Sarah in disbelief, some with pity, others with barely masked glee at this juicy scandal. In that moment, Sarah felt the walls closing in on her, the humiliating spotlight burning her skin. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish. A single tear escaped her eye, but she forced herself not to break down in front of everyone. Summoning every ounce of pride, she lifted her chin, turned on her heel, and strode away. The music faltered, and the hush that fell over the crowd was like a coffin lid slamming shut. As she exited the gallery, the last thing she saw was Malcolm stepping off the stage, guided by Elena's hand on his arm. The fallout from the gala was immediate and ruthless. Social media exploded with speculation. Page 6 ran headlines like, "Rutherford denies fatherhood scandal, rocks NYC high society." The tabloids played looped footage of Malcolm's dismissal of Sarah, freeze-framing on her devastated face as she fled the scene. For Sarah, shame and heartbreak merged into a numb, suffocating cloud. She spent the following days barricaded in the penthouse, ignoring calls, refusing visitors. Even her longtime friend, Marianne Dixon, a fellow philanthropist, found it challenging to comfort her. Gossip columns lit up with fresh rumors. Some claimed Sarah had made up the pregnancy to trap Malcolm. Others insinuated that her unborn child might belong to another man. She felt the world closing in on her each article, another dagger in her chest. As if the emotional torment weren't enough, Malcolm sent word through his personal assistant that she should move out of the penthouse. According to him, it no longer suited their changing marital situation. Sarah read and reread that curt message, scarcely believing his callousness. The man she had loved, who had once professed devotion, was throwing her away, pregnancy, and all like an inconvenient afterthought. In a haze of despair, She decided she could not spend another minute in that penthouse saturated with memories of betrayal. Gathering her belongings, she fled to a quaint hotel on the outskirts of the city, ignoring the stares of onlookers who recognized her from the tabloids. There, she found temporary refuge, staving off reporters who camped outside. One evening, Marianne arrived unannounced, bringing fresh clothes, warm soup, and an encouraging smile. "You can't let him destroy you," she said, pressing Sarah's hand gently. "You're stronger than this, Sarah. You always have been." Sarah listened numbly, swirling a spoon in her soup. She was physically and emotionally drained, unsure of her next steps. But Marianne was insistent. "Move forward. Fight for what's right, whether that's your child's future or your own dignity. I'll help you in any way I can." Those words planted a seed of resolve in Sarah. She realized that despair could only lead her deeper into darkness, and she had not just herself to think about. There was a child on the way who depended on her. That realization began to stir something fierce and unbreakable in her heart. She decided to contact her family in Boston for support. Her parents had always been quietly wealthy, but they kept a low profile, preferring philanthropic deeds over social climbing. They had never entirely approved of Malcolm, but had conceded to Sarah's choice out of respect for her happiness. Now, with tears and trembling words, Sarah detailed the humiliating events of the past few weeks. Her parents responded with immediate concern and unconditional love. "Come home, Sarah," her father said gently over the phone. "We'll work everything out. You and the baby will be safe here." She glanced around the modest hotel suite, thinking of the tabloids that had turned her life into a circus. As much as she dreaded running back to Boston, it felt like the only haven she had left. And so, steeling herself for an uncertain future, Sarah booked the next flight out. Little did she know that the path ahead would lead her to an unexpected transformation, one that would place her directly in Malcolm's line of sight, yet again, only this time with the upper hand. Arriving in Boston, under the cloak of early morning fog, Sarah stepped into the warmth of her family's townhouse, nestled in an upscale neighborhood close to Beacon Hill. The tall windows, antique furnishings, and subtle aroma of pine welcomed her home in a way she hadn't felt in months. Her mother, Camille, immediately embraced her, tears glistening in her eyes at the sight of her daughter's pale cheeks and trembling lips. Sarah's father, Jonathan Talbot, was a reserved man, known in philanthropic circles for funding educational programs and hospitals across the country. Over a quiet breakfast, he listened as Sarah recounted every crushing detail of Malcolm's betrayal. Unlike his wife, who choked back tears and occasionally interjected with words of comfort, Jonathan remained composed, gazing at his daughter with profound empathy and something else, a quiet anger he seldom showed. Once Sarah finished, Jonathan rose from the dining room table and slipped away. Sarah assumed he needed a private moment to process the news. But when he returned, he carried a thick folder in hand and gestured for her to follow him to the study, a dignified room lined with leather-bound books and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. "Sarah," he began, settling into a leather armchair across from her, "I've always tried to respect your choices, even when they worried me. But this, what Malcolm has done, is unforgivable." She nodded, bracing herself. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have listened." "No need for apologies," he cut her off gently. "But there are matters we must discuss. Your mother and I are wealthier than you realize. We built our fortune over decades, investing quietly, ensuring we had enough for our family and the charities we support. I never flaunted it. I never felt the need to." Sarah's brow furrowed. I know you've been successful, but her father held up a hand, smiling gently. My dear, we are more than simply comfortable. We're extremely well off. I say this not to boast, but to explain that when you married Malcolm, I kept silent about my net worth. I wanted you to learn about life and relationships without the burden of any inheritance overshadowing your decisions. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken. She had always understood her family was well-to-do, but never suspected the breadth of it. Why tell me this now? Jonathan opened the folder to reveal documents, bank statements, property deeds, and to Sarah's surprise, ownership stakes in major companies she recognized. Because it's time to take control of your future. You are pregnant with Malcolm's child, and he has humiliated and abandoned you. You have a right to protect yourself and your baby, and you have a right to teach Malcolm a lesson in humility. She stared at the documents, her mind reeling. What? What do you suggest? Jonathan leaned forward, his voice calm yet resolute. In addition to these assets, I have close relationships with influential business leaders, some of whom sit on boards that even Rutherford and Pierce cannot ignore. Join me, Sarah. Learn the ropes of high-level business and philanthropy. Turn your heartbreak into leverage. Because if Malcolm thinks you're going to vanish into obscurity, he's in for a rude awakening. A flicker of determination sparked in Sarah's eyes. She placed a protective hand over her belly and inhaled a long, steadying breath. In that moment, the fragile woman who had fled New York City began to fade. In her place emerged someone ready to stand tall and reclaim her power. "Teach me," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next several months, Sarah immersed herself in a rigorous education under her father's guidance. Like an apprentice absorbing the craft from a master artisan, she spent hours poring over financial reports, corporate bylaws, and philanthropic strategies. Jonathan introduced her to top executives from industries spanning healthcare to tech. Some recognized her from media coverage of the scandal, but upon learning she was Jonathan Talbot's daughter, any superficial judgments quickly vanished. The Talbot name carried a weight that resonated in hushed boardrooms across the country. Far from the prying eyes of New York's tabloids, Sarah gradually transformed. She traded in her heartbreak for a fierce determination. Her baby bump grew, serving as a constant reminder of her responsibilities and her potential. She attended networking events in Boston under the discreet protection of her parents' circle, forging new relationships and rekindling her passion for philanthropic work. No one asked intrusive questions about the father, though speculation flickered in hushed tones. Sarah said little on the subject. She was determined that her identity and future accomplishments would not be defined solely by her estranged husband. In time, she discovered an intrinsic flair for connecting with people on a genuine level, something that had always been overshadowed by Malcolm's domineering presence. Where he excelled in intimidation tactics, she thrived in empathy and collaboration. Her father beamed with pride, watching her stand at the helm of newly launched charitable initiatives that linked technology grants to underserved schools. Even her mother, who once hovered with worry, marveled at the graceful confidence Sarah exuded. Amid these strides, Sarah still grappled with moments of vulnerability. Late at night, she'd sometimes wake from dreams of her wedding day, Malcolm's loving smile, the warmth of his arms, and feel a profound sadness. She carried the heartbreak like a scar. Yet each sunrise brought a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that she had chosen a path forward. Meanwhile, the media frenzy around Malcolm and Elena Moretti raged on. Their affair was no longer a secret, and the paparazzi captured them stepping out of lavish restaurants, boarding private jets, and attending exclusive parties. The more they flaunted their relationship, the more they fueled rumors. Helena Brooks, the same reporter who had confronted Malcolm at the gala, wrote a scathing editorial piece condemning the blatant disrespect Malcolm showed towards Sarah. Still, Malcolm seemed untouchable, buoyed by Rutherford and Pierce's robust profits and newly announced acquisitions. But trouble brewed beneath the glitzy surface. Several mid-tier investors, unsettled by Malcolm's public scandal, began to withdraw their funds from Rutherford and Pierce. The exit of one or two was manageable, but a growing pattern hinted at broader mistrust. Helena tried to patch the cracks by enticing wealthy European partners, but board members grew restless, demanding Malcolm address the negative press. It was around this time that Malcolm caught wind of rumors regarding Sarah's re-emergence in Boston's elite circles. Initially, he dismissed them. How powerful could she be under her father's wing? He assumed she was just licking her wounds, perhaps dabbling in some low-level charity work. He had no intention of reconciling or acknowledging her pregnancy. In his mind, she was a closed chapter. His focus remained on Eleanor and the immediate business expansions that he believed would elevate Rutherford and Pierce above any scandal. Then a rumor reached him through a mutual acquaintance. Sarah was not only active in philanthropy, but on track to join the board of a major philanthropic foundation, with deep-pocket donors, some of whom Malcolm had been courting for months. He found it laughable at first, imagining Sarah as a naive do-gooder easily manipulated by older men in suits. But the rumor refused to die, and soon other well-connected sources whispered of the return of Sarah Talbot, praising her quiet composure and philanthropic savvy. One evening, over a dinner of imported Italian truffle pasta, Elena leaned in and casually mentioned, "I heard from a contact in Boston that Sarah will be part of a new foundation with the potential to receive substantial corporate backing. They're naming board members next month. It's rumored to be a game-changer in philanthropic circles." Malcolm paused mid-bite, irritation stirring in his gut. Sarah couldn't navigate corporate waters if her life depended on it, he scoffed. That foundation is probably small potatoes. She'll likely only get on the board because of her parents' money. Elena smirked. Even if that's true, we should keep an eye on her. The philanthropic world has a way of creeping into public relations, and public relations matter to our brand. Malcolm dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand, but inwardly, a seed of unease took root. He remembered Sarah's unwavering kindness, her knack for building authentic connections, traits he once considered endearing but ultimately inconsequential. Yet with the backing of her formidable father, those very traits could be formidable assets. For the moment, though, Malcolm told himself he had bigger things to worry about, like finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger with a European hedge fund and continuing to placate the Rutherford and Pierce board. Little did he know, the next time he saw Sarah, the world he had so carefully constructed would tilt on its axis. A crisp autumn day brought Sarah back to New York for the first time since her public humiliation at the gala. She had been invited to a major charity symposium at the Waldorf Astoria, co-sponsored by the influential Fortune for Good Foundation. It was a golden opportunity to network and further legitimize her evolving profile. Despite her father's assurance that she could handle the environment, Sarah felt a twinge of anxiety stepping onto the bustling Manhattan sidewalk, the cacophony of yellow taxis and towering skyscrapers instantly reminding her of old wounds. Yet this time Sarah arrived as a changed woman. Dressed in a tailored navy blue maternity suit and sporting a quiet confidence, she garnered respect from onlookers. There was no sign of the timid socialite who once shrank behind her husband's ambitions. Instead, colleagues, philanthropic leaders, and media personalities greeted her with admiration. Inside one of the Waldorf's opulent ballrooms, the symposium buzzed with conversation. Panel discussions covered topics ranging from global healthcare initiatives to educational reform. Sarah was slated to speak on a panel concerning strategic philanthropy in emerging markets, a subject she had spent months researching. She took her seat on stage beside seasoned foundation directors who welcomed her warmly. Backstage, Helena Brooks was mingling with the press pool, still intrigued by Sarah's transformation. The two locked eyes briefly. Helena offered a small nod of respect. Sarah reciprocated with a polite smile. 30 minutes into the panel, Sarah spoke with poise, articulating the importance of culturally sensitive philanthropy. She emphasized how oversight committees should include local leaders, thereby ensuring that financial resources aren't just thrown at a problem, but strategically allocated for long-term development. It was an approach that combined her father's business acumen with her own compassionate vision. Her words resonated. In the crowd, a hush fell as people leaned forward, captivated by her eloquence. Even the panel moderator noted Sarah's unique perspective, hinting that he hoped to see her at more events. By the time the panel concluded, Sarah had secured new invitations to speak at various philanthropic summits. Just as she stepped off the stage, a cold voice sliced through the applause. "Well, well, look who has become the star of the show." Sarah tensed. She recognized that voice instantly. Malcolm. He stood near the exit, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, a sardonic grin twisting his features. Elena hovered at his side, her face a mask of calculated coolness. For a split second, the memory of that humiliating night at the Met flashed before Sarah's eyes. But as she locked gazes with Malcolm, she felt not fear, but a quiet surge of empowerment. She was no longer the fragile woman desperate for his approval. She was a mother-to-be, fortified by her own family's support and her newfound place in a world that valued her voice. "Hello, Malcolm," she said, evenly, stepping forward with a posture that radiated composure. "Elena." The tension crackled like static electricity in the air. Onlookers looked on, curiously uncertain whether they were about to witness a heated confrontation or a polite exchange. Neither Sarah nor Malcolm had any idea that this was merely the prelude to a much bigger stage where their conflict would unfold for all to see, and for Sarah to claim an unexpected victory. Malcolm's presence at the charity symposium wasn't purely coincidental. Rutherford and Pierce had been courting fortune for Good Foundation for a potential partnership to improve the firm's tarnished image. His plan involved leveraging Elena's European contacts to secure donations and philanthropic collaborations that would offset the scandal still lingering in the media. However, Malcolm had not anticipated Sarah's ascendant role in the Foundation's circles. After the panel, the Foundation's executives hosted a private luncheon in a nearby ballroom for select speakers and VIP guests. Over crystal glasses of sparkling water and refined plates of salmon mousse, conversation revolved around philanthropic strategies and potential cross-collaborations. Sarah found herself at a table with a few high-profile donors, including Loretta Vanderhall, a philanthropist known for endowing countless scholarships, and Mark Ellis, a venture capitalist who had recently pivoted to social entrepreneurship. Malcolm and Elena floated from table to table, occasionally glancing in Sarah's direction. He feigned casual indifference, but inside he seethed. How had Sarah gotten so close to these power players without his knowledge? Elena, sensing Malcolm's mood, whispered, "Maybe we should say hello." Diplomacy could go a long way. He gave a curt nod, and together they made their way to Sarah's table. As they approached, Loretta Vanderhall beamed at Sarah. "I must say, my dear, your insights this morning were a breath of fresh air. We could use your perspective on the board. Malcolm stiffened at the word board. Before he could interrupt, Sarah smiled. Thank you, Loretta. I'd be honored to contribute in any way I can. Elena, always quick with a strategic pivot, leaned toward Loretta. We, at Rutherford and Pierce, would be thrilled to partner with the Foundation on future initiatives. Malcolm and I are very impressed with the synergy we see here. Loretta's expression cooled slightly. Partnerships are wonderful, of course, but we're discerning. We only join forces with entities that share our values. I suppose that's something we'll discuss at the board meeting next month. Malcolm forced a polite smile. Absolutely. We're eager to demonstrate our commitment. Excellent, Loretta replied, though her enthusiasm seemed reserved. She and the others turned back to Sarah, continuing a conversation about an upcoming trip to Sierra Leone to assess local educational needs. Malcolm and Elena lingered awkwardly before drifting away. Outside the luncheon hall, Malcolm pulled Eleanor aside, his voice a tense whisper. She's on track to be part of that board. That's not good for us. Elena arched an eyebrow. Why not? If Sarah's on the board, we might be able to leverage her presence. Convince her to vouch for Rutherford and Pierce. Malcolm's anger smoldered. She's pregnant with my child and probably resents me. You think she'll help us? Elena's features hardened. She knew the precariousness of this situation all too well. We'll see, she said quietly. But if she's on that board, it could spell trouble. It'll give her connections influence. Malcolm turned away, running a hand through his impeccably styled hair. He felt cornered, threatened by Sarah's sudden surge in social capital. This was a game of chess he had never envisioned, and Sarah had pieces on the board he hadn't accounted for. For now, he would keep up appearances, continue the charade of philanthropic interest, and attempt to charm the same board members who were lionizing his soon-to-be ex-wife. But deep down, he sensed an oncoming collision he might not be able to control. In the weeks following the symposium, Sarah continued her involvement with the Fortune for Good Foundation. She attended strategy meetings, connected with local and international project leaders, and prepared for the official board appointments. Loretta Vanderhall, impressed by Sarah's genuine passion and background, championed her nomination. Most of the existing board members approved, recognizing the Talbot family's formidable philanthropic footprint and Sarah's fresh perspective. The date of the board announcement loomed, a black-tie gala at the Plaza Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. The event would not only unveil the foundation's newest initiatives, but also the new board members. Sarah wasn't naive. She anticipated the possibility of crossing paths with Malcolm again. However, she didn't let that intimidate her. She had faced him once before, and each day that passed, her resolve only solidified. On the evening of the gala, Sarah arrived in a flowing emerald gown that elegantly accommodated her visibly pregnant form. She was greeted warmly by Loretta and other executives who escorted her through the throngs of well-dressed guests. All around them, crystal chandeliers shimmered and classical music wafted through the air, underscoring the night's celebratory mood. From across the room, Malcolm caught sight of her. His stomach lurched. This was the first time he'd seen her so visibly pregnant, and despite his attempts to squash any pangs of guilt, a flicker of remorse jolted through him. Elena, standing beside him, tightened her grip on his arm as she noticed his gaze fixate on Sarah. "Focus on networking," Elena murmured. "We have investors to meet." Malcolm nodded stiffly, forcing himself to exchange pleasantries with high-profile donors. Yet he couldn't shake the awareness of Sarah's presence. She was laughing with Loretta, shaking hands with Mark Ellis, and drawing attention for all the right reasons. More than once, the corners of Malcolm's mind drifted to the unborn child, his child, who would soon enter the world. The fatherly instinct he'd suppressed stirred uncomfortably. Soon the moment for the big announcement arrived. The foundation's chair, an elderly man named Cedric Armstrong, stepped onto the stage. With a resonant voice, he introduced new initiatives focusing on global healthcare and educational reform. Then came the highlight, the official appointment of new board members. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Cedric read the names, slowly building suspense. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept a calm exterior. Finally, Cedric concluded, and last, but certainly not least, we are pleased to welcome Sarah Talbot to our board of directors. Thunderous applause erupted. Cameras flashed, capturing Sarah's radiant smile as she rose and made her way to the stage. She bowed her head, graciously clutching the microphone when Cedric offered it. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm honored and thrilled to join the Fortune for Good Foundation. My family's legacy has always been about fostering real, meaningful change, and I hope to continue that mission here. Together, we can uplift communities and change lives." Another round of applause. Within that sea of faces, Sarah's gaze skimmed Malcolm. Their eyes locked for a split second, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them and the uncertain road ahead. Standing at the edge of the stage, Malcolm felt a weight in his chest. For the first time, he truly comprehended that Sarah wasn't just out of his life, she was rising in a way that could someday eclipse him. The gala continued in full swing, champagne flutes clinking and conversations flowing. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers from philanthropic circles, each eager to congratulate her and discuss potential projects. Amid the excitement, she excused herself for a moment to catch her breath in a quieter corridor away from the press of the crowd and the glare of camera flashes. No sooner had she stepped into the softly lit hallway than she heard a voice behind her. "Sarah." She turned to see Malcolm, his features tense, his usually immaculate tie slightly askew. He looked at her with an inscrutable mix of regret and frustration. "Congratulations on your appointment," he said, his tone carrying the brittle edge of forced politeness. "Thank you," Sarah replied, maintaining composure. She noticed him glance briefly at her baby bump, his jaw tightening. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Malcolm spoke again, low enough that no one else could overhear. "Is it mine?" Sarah's heart clenched at the stark question. She inhaled, steadying herself. "You know the answer, Malcolm. I tried to tell you when I first found out." He looked away, jaw muscles flexing. "You blindsided me. I was in the middle of important deals, and you—" "Don't you dare!" Sarah cut in, her voice unwavering. "I came to you privately. I gave you every chance to share in this moment. You chose to deny me, deny our child publicly, no less." Malcolm exhaled a sharp breath. "I was cornered in front of the media. I panicked." "That doesn't make it any better," Sarah replied. She felt an unexpected surge of empathy for the man he might have been, but the memory of his cruelty left no room for sympathy now. He stuffed his hands into his pockets. "Look, what's done is done. But we need to talk about how this will affect everything. Our reputations, the business ramifications." "And if you're really having my child, I am," she said firmly, "and I won't hide in the shadows, nor will I be intimidated by your business concerns." They stood there, the hum of distant music underscoring their tense standoff. For a moment, Malcolm's eyes flickered with something like remorse, but it faded as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the guarded arrogance Sarah knew too well. "Sarah, you've been through a lot, but let's be rational. If you're on the board here, you'll have a public platform. Our names are linked, whether we like it or not. We could find a mutual understanding like maintaining a civil front, so we don't tear each other apart in the press. Sarah considered his words. Once upon a time, she might have agreed just to keep the peace. But she was done kowtowing to his wishes, done pretending to be the obedient wife desperate for his approval. "I'll maintain a civil front, Malcolm," she finally said. "But understand this, I'm no longer living in your shadow. I won't be controlled, nor will I protect you from the consequences of your choices." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing with newfound confidence. In that moment, Sarah felt like she had reclaimed another piece of herself, one that Malcolm had tried to bury under his ambition. Little did either of them know the biggest twist in their saga was just around the corner. A month later, an extraordinary meeting of the Fortune for Good Foundation board convened in a sleek, glass-walled conference room overlooking Central Park. The agenda was unusually packed, containing not only philanthropic discussions, but also the unveiling of a potential collaboration with corporate heavyweights. A collaboration Rutherford and Pierce desperately wanted to secure to rehabilitate its image. Sarah arrived early, meticulously prepared, her pregnant belly now a proud statement of her impending motherhood. She had pored over partnership proposals, philanthropic metrics, and media impact studies, determined to ensure that any deal made would genuinely serve the Foundation's mission rather than merely polish corporate reputations. Loretta Vanderhall welcomed her, warmly leading her to a seat near the head of the table. Cedric Armstrong, the chair, looked on with approval, pleased by Sarah's dedication. Soon other board members filed in, some from old money families, others from cutting-edge tech backgrounds. They greeted Sarah with polite nods and kind words about her pregnancy. At precisely 10 o'clock, Cedric called the meeting to order. The first half hour was devoted to routine Foundation business status reports on overseas projects, financial audits, and upcoming events. Then Cedric cleared his throat. "Next on our agenda is the proposed collaboration with Rutherford and Pierce, as well as several other corporations who've expressed interest. We'll hear their pitches and decide as a board whether we'll move forward." An assistant opened the door, and in walked Malcolm Rutherford, alongside Elena Moretti and a couple of Rutherford and Pierce executives. Malcolm wore a crisp navy suit, though he looked more strained than usual. Elena, striking as ever in a black power dress, carried a portfolio of documents. Sarah's eyes flicked briefly to Malcolm's face. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned in her chest, but outwardly she remained composed. After presentations from a few smaller firms, it was Rutherford and Pierce's turn. Elena began with a polished overview of the company's philanthropic track record, much of which Sarah knew had been orchestrated by her own social connections back when she was Malcolm's wife. Malcolm followed up with a talk about upcoming investment expansions, emphasizing how philanthropic partnerships would be central to Rutherford and Pierce's new corporate responsibility initiative. For too long, Malcolm declared, "Our industry has prioritized profits over social impact." Rutherford and Pierce aims to set a new standard. "With the Foundation's guidance, we can funnel significant resources to pressing social causes." He spoke persuasively, sprinkling in references to existing philanthropic models. But Sarah noted the tension around his eyes, the forced smile at the corners of his mouth. She sensed he was not entirely comfortable addressing a room where she, his estranged wife, carrying his child, had authority. When the presentation concluded, Cedric thanked Malcolm and opened the floor for questions. Loretta Vanderhall inquired about the transparency of Rutherford and Pierce's donation channels. Another board member, Dr. Anita Chowdhury, asked about community engagement. Malcolm and Eleanor navigated these queries with practiced ease. Finally, The board members turned expectantly to Sarah. She cleared her throat, feeling a ripple of anticipation in the air. Malcolm, she began, her tone balanced. In your proposal, you highlight Rutherford and Pierce's commitment to ethical partnerships. Yet there's ongoing legal scrutiny regarding some of your recent acquisitions overseas. How can we be sure that the philanthropic funds won't be compromised by these controversies? A hush fell over the room. Malcolm visibly stiffened quickly, masking his discomfort with a diplomatic smile. Sarah, I assure you, those concerns are being addressed. We're fully compliant with international regulations, and an internal investigation is already underway to ensure any questionable activities are rooted out. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That's reassuring. But as a board member, I feel it's crucial to see concrete evidence of these internal measures, not just promises. At that, Elena stepped in, her voice smooth. We're prepared to provide documentation as well as statements from our legal counsel. We believe that full transparency will earn the Foundation's trust. Loretta glanced at Sarah, who maintained her composure. Very well, Loretta said. Please submit those documents at your earliest convenience. We'll review them before making a final decision. The tension in the room eased slightly. The Rutherford and Pierce team politely concluded their pitch. Cedric then called for a brief recess, allowing board members to confer privately. While the corporate representatives stepped outside, Sarah joined Loretta, Cedric, and Dr. Chowdhury in a quiet corner. I have reservations, Sarah admitted softly, not just because of my personal history, but because I know how Rutherford and Pierce can sometimes treat philanthropy as a PR tool rather than a genuine cause. Loretta pressed her lips together. We've seen the media coverage, but we also know Malcolm Rutherford can bring significant capital to our foundation. If it's sincere that money could accelerate our missions exponentially. Cedric nodded in agreement. That's why we need to tread carefully. The Foundation must remain reputable. Dr. Chowdhury tapped her chin thoughtfully. Sarah, your insight is invaluable. You've been on the inside. If Rutherford and Pierce's interests align authentically with our goals, perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial path. Sarah felt a pang of conflict. She wanted the Foundation to prosper, but partnering with Malcolm felt like inviting a fox into the henhouse. However, she also recognized the possibility of steering Rutherford and Pierce's resources toward genuine good if strictly regulated. All right, she said at length. I won't oppose the partnership outright, but I recommend we establish a strict oversight committee. I'll volunteer to be part of it. The trio exchanged looks and then nodded collectively. Cedric patted Sarah's arm reassuringly. That's settled then. We'll present our conditions to Rutherford and Pierce. When the meeting reconvened, Cedric laid out the terms. We appreciate your proposal, Mr. Rutherford, but we'll require an oversight committee to ensure every donation or collaboration is aligned with the Foundation's ethical standards. Sarah Talbot, along with 2 other board members, will oversee these processes. Sarah kept her gaze steady on Malcolm as Cedric spoke. She did not gloat. She maintained a professional detachment that belied the emotional complexity roiling beneath. Malcolm swallowed his composure, faltering for just a moment. Next to him, Eleanor's face seemed stony. Of course, Malcolm managed, forcing a gracious nod. We welcome transparency. A subdued murmur passed among the board members. The stage was set for a collaboration that, if properly managed, could yield enormous benefits for charitable causes. Yet everyone in the room sensed the unspoken drama swirling between Sarah and Malcolm, an ex-wife now holding a gatekeeper's role over her former spouse's philanthropic aspirations. As the meeting ended and handshakes were exchanged, Sarah allowed herself a single moment to breathe. She had navigated the ordeal with dignity, ensuring the foundation's interests remained paramount. Outside, the sun filtered through the glass walls, casting ribbons of light across the conference room floor. She touched her belly gently, a silent affirmation of the future she was building for herself, for her child, and for the communities the foundation served. In that future, Malcolm Rutherford would no longer dictate the terms of her life. Instead, she would stand as his equal, or in some respects, his superior, proving that from the ashes of betrayal, one could rise strong and unbreakable. With her unborn child soon to arrive, Sarah embraced a life shaped by resilience and purpose. No longer was she the quiet socialite overshadowed by a millionaire husband's ambition. Today, she stands as a formidable member of the Fortune for Good Foundation's board, championing causes that uplift communities globally. While Malcolm hovers at the periphery, mired in his own struggle to maintain power and prestige, Sarah focuses on forging alliances, channeling funds where they matter most, and preparing for motherhood with unflinching courage. And now, dear listeners and viewers, if you found this story gripping, filled with betrayal, redemption, and the ultimate triumph of perseverance, please like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more captivating tales of love loss and reinvention. Stay tuned for our next dramatic real-life story. Total approximate word count, 5, 9, 5 to 6, 100 words.